Yeah, so thanks for the opportunity, Jackie. As Dr. Lee said, right now is the time to start thinking about doing pecan plant tissue nutrient testing. And so I'm going to talk real briefly about how we go about doing that, why we do it. And then we've been working with pecan growers over the last several years to try and pull these samples statewide. And so we've been kind of monitoring how our samples have been coming back. And so I want to briefly present those results and talk about what we can learn from what we're seeing from growers pulling these samples. So this really gets to the heart of this question of how do we know if plants are getting the nutrition that they need? And there's a couple of different ways that we can observe the pecan orchards and see, are we supplying sufficient nutrients? Are the plants growing in a healthy way, or do we need to amend our fertilizer practices? One of the easiest ways to tell if pecan orchards are getting the fertility that they need are just to observe visual symptoms of growth and leaf color and leaf fullness. Typically what we want to see in a pecan orchard is that in a mature orchard, we're going to see about 5 to 10 inches of growth per year. And here on this slide, you can see this new growth that I'm talking about. So you see the older wood from the previous year, and then you see these new shoots that are kind of the lighter green, lighter brown color. We'd like to see those shoots reach about 5 to 10 inches. In a non-bearing orchard, we actually want to see a little bit more growth because the plant isn't putting any effort into making nuts. And so we're going to want to see those new shoots extend out about 24 inches. Now, if we're not seeing this new growth happening, or we're seeing, somewhere within that range happening, another way that we can assess the plants to get some more specific information about how well fertilized the plants are is through plant tissue nutrient sampling. So that's kind of our goal for today. With plant tissue nutrient sampling, what we're trying to do is to optimize yield. So the plants may be growing, we may be seeing adequate growth, but there may be a nutrient that we're not supplying in a level so that we're hitting our sufficiency. And the way that sometimes we talk about this is that we have this bucket, and whatever nutrient is most limiting, that's where our bucket will fill up with yield up into that limiting nutrient, and then we're losing yield as it spills out over that limiting nutrient. So in this case, maybe potassium is limiting, and that's where we're losing our yield. If we're able to increase the amount of potassium that we apply, then maybe the next most limited nutrient is going to be magnesium, and then we need to affect our magnesium levels. So our goal is basically to avoid deficiency and try and get all of our nutrients into a sufficiency level without going over and applying more nutrients than the plant can use, and definitely not getting into a situation where we're over applying nutrients and actually causing a toxicity. So with plant tissue nutrient sampling, we're able to kind of key in and see where our plants are in terms of all of these different nutrients. Of course, this is just one of the tools that you'll have in your toolbox. Plant tissue nutrient sampling should be paired with soil testing. Soil testing is going to give us an idea of all the nutrients that are present in the soil that could be taken up by the plant. And soil testing will also tell us pH. And of course, we know pH is very important in determining how available those nutrients are in the soil. So generally what we recommend for a lot of our specialty crop growers is to do regular soil testing. If you think that there's a problem, to soil test every year just to monitor soil pH. If you're not having problems with soil pH, you can probably get away with testing every 2 or 3 years. Plant tissue nutrient sampling is sort of the complement because it tells you what the plants actually accessed out of the soil and took up. So these are the nutrients that are being taken up by the plant. And this is sometimes a better way to gauge how we need to be amending our fertility practices. Plant tissue nutrient sampling can be done every year, and it should be done in July. There's 2 different ways to approach plant tissue nutrient sampling. So we can do it predictively, where we pull samples this year in July. Maybe we start to notice that potassium is just a little bit low or zinc is just a little bit high, and that helps us make decisions about what kind of fertility we put out this year, and is that program working, or do we need to amend it for the next season? But plant tissue nutrient sampling can also be used in a diagnostic way. So if we have some trees that just aren't performing well, the leaves aren't filling out as much as we would like to see, and then we have another orchard nearby where everything looks good, you can also pull samples from both locations, and then we can compare to try and see if it's a fertility issue that may be causing the problem. But primarily right now, we're going to be talking about predictive sampling. And this is, of course, done in July to try and determine how much fertility we put out this year. Was it enough? Was it too much? And how can we amend for the following season? One of the things that's really important to realize about plant tissue nutrient sampling is that we need to not only pull the sample at the right time, but we also need to target the right age of leaf. The standards by which we're going to compare our samples to have been developed for a very specific phenological stage of the plant growth and are taken from leaves that tend to be stable where nutrients are not fluctuating. If we aren't able to pull samples during this specific time or from the right spot, it's going to make it difficult for us to compare our results to the known standards. So basically what we're looking for is we're looking for leaves that are recently mature that are coming off of that new growth. So these are typically going to be leaves that are coming off around where the nutlets are forming. Essentially what we're going to do is find one of these little side branches and then count back from the end of it and select 2 leaves that are opposite one another, generally about the 6th and 7th leaf back. And we're going to pull those off and collect 100 pairs of those across an orchard. We do want to be aware of some, not only choosing leaflets in the bottom of the canopy or leaflets that are constantly being shaded or that may have some disease or insect damage to them. We want to choose healthy leaflets. And so, again, collecting 40 to 60 pairs or more from 15 to 20 trees. Of course, the more leaves you pull, the better the sample. Typically, we recommend pulling separate samples if you're going to be sampling off of bearing and non-bearing trees because of the differences in fertility recommendations that we may make for those types of situations. I also typically recommend trying to pull different samples for different varieties if you're managing those varieties differently. This is particularly important if, for instance, you are managing some of your developed cultivars differently than maybe a planting that you have that is only made up of natives. Because we put out a lot of foliar zinc applications in pecan, I do recommend that after you pull the samples, you just wipe them down with kind of a damp paper towel to try and remove any remaining residue that may be on the leaves, particularly also if you've recently put out any kinds of fungicides. We also recommend that growers pull their samples on Monday. Pulling that sample on Monday means that the sample is going to arrive in the lab in the same week that you pulled it. It's not going to get stuck in the mail over the weekend. And generally, you'll get your results back within that same week. Of course, you want to send those leaves in paper bags. And as I said before, we want to be aware about choosing healthy leaves and choosing leaves throughout the plant canopy and not just on the north side of the tree or just on the south side of the tree. And again, pulling multiple samples is just going to give you more information, particularly if you're managing different areas of different soil types, different management programs, different ages, or different varieties. So after you pull this sample, the next thing that you're going to have to do is make sure that you fill out this form. And this is Agri 423. And the picture that I'm using is actually the one that was from 2015, so it's a little out of date, but the form is the same. The big thing that's changed is the price. It's $20, and you're going to select the plant basic package, fill in your basic information up here. And one other thing that I will ask growers typically to respond, particularly for pecans, is give us some information about what varieties you're planting, how old the trees are, etc. And if growers are willing to also report what they're doing in their row middle. So is it a sod-free strip at the base of the trees, or are they using clover, etc. This will just help in the interpretation of their results. So growers will send in their sample in their paper bag with their leaves and this form, and then hopefully within a week, they'll get their results back. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to take those results and compare them to some known recommended ranges that we would expect most pecan orchards to fall within. Something that's important to realize is that there are different ranges for the native or low input orchards, so orchards that are not being irrigated, versus a high input orchard that has some named cultivars that's being managed with irrigation and full recommended practices. So just be aware of this, and this is in part why when I showed you the previous form that I asked that growers report what varieties they're using, because this is going to help me decide, or you as a county agent decide which ranges you should be using. Of course, our macronutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, calcium, these are the ranges in percent, and then our micronutrients are reported in parts per million or milligrams per kilogram. And this is what the results looked like when we first get them back. This was a sample that Clay Wingfield down at the Hope Station had pulled for us. And initially, you're just going to get these numbers here that are reporting all those percentages and parts per million. If, however, you would like me to provide any input, all that you're going to have to do is reply to the email, because I'm always CC'd on the email, and just say, hey, Amanda, will you help me look at this sample? And then I will put in some comments next to your different results, and also give you some recommendations at the end about what these results mean and how you might want to amend your fertility practices going forward. So this is just an example of a finalized report that was sent to Clay in 2019. So we've been doing this program now for 3 years with pecan growers all across the state, and we're starting to see some interesting results. So just again, here are our recommended ranges. I am going to focus on the high input orchards because most of our samples are coming back from orchards that are using named cultivars and using irrigation, etc. So this is the ranges that we are looking for. Anything in red over here indicates that the average for our samples coming back is low. Anything in green indicates that the samples coming back on average are above the range, so they're high. So of course, if you look across here for nitrogen over the last 3 years, we have consistently been coming back low on nitrogen on our samples here in Arkansas. Again, this is an average, and anywhere from 20 to 30 samples are being sent in. So we are having some growers who are meeting this range of 2.4 to 3.0%. But you'll notice that in 2018, 2019, we were pretty close to that range, 2.4, just a little shy. But in 2020, we were pretty far below it. So nitrogen is a nutrient we need to look at. Phosphorus was only low in 2018, and since then, we have hit above that minimum range of 0.14. Potassium is also consistently coming back low. We want to be at least 1%, and we're always usually in the upper 0.9%. Sulfur consistently has always come back low for us. I've done some looking into this, and I'm not sure sulfur is a nutrient that we necessarily need to worry about. We're not super low on it, but I do have some curiosity about if we need to be recommending more sulfur applications in our pecan orchards in Arkansas. And then boron has come back high on average just in 1 year in 2019. So this gives us some ideas about how we may be needing to approach fertility management differently here in Arkansas, or specifically reaching out to certain growers who are helping drive some of these averages down. Because as I said, we do have some growers who are hitting all of these targets and don't have problems, but we do have other growers that may be having some issues. One thing I do want to comment on is, if you watch zinc we know is a very important nutrient for pecan growers. Our zinc levels have been trending upward pretty dramatically over the last 3 years. We're not yet over the maximum threshold, but something to watch and see, kind of where this is coming from, and if in 2021 we continue to follow that trend. But of course, the big question growers always have is, okay, I got these results now. This is indicating I'm having a nitrogen issue, I'm having a potassium issue, so what am I going to do? And here are our typical recommendations. Again, nitrogen seems to be a problem for quite a few growers. You know, we're averaging anywhere from 60 to 75% of growers are not meeting that recommended threshold. In part, for some of these growers, it may be that they're applying too low of a nitrogen rate, or they're applying no nitrogen. Typically, what we recommend is anywhere from 100 to 150 pounds per acre applied through the season in a split application. And again, we're trying to target different important phenological stages. So a big chunk of that we want to go out in late March or April, and then have a follow-up application in late May, early June. And those correspond to when plant growth is starting to happen, and when nitrogen stores are being depleted from what the plant has stored from the previous year. Now, one thing I will say is, you know, if you go out and pull some samples right now, you get your results in a week, we do still have some time to make a subsequent nitrogen application this season if that sample is coming back pretty low, particularly on a tree that has a heavy crop. It may be suitable to apply anywhere from 35 to 45 pounds per acre of nitrogen to try and help push that crop along and make sure that the plant isn't going into the winter already in a nitrogen deficiency state. Another thing to keep in mind, you know, as we start to push growers to apply more nitrogen, is that the potassium is also coming back low. And generally, we want to make sure that we're maintaining that nitrogen potassium balance of around 2 to 1. And so as growers start to increase their nitrogen rates, they're also going to need to increase their potassium rates. If their samples are coming back low, they should apply 100 pounds per acre of potassium in late winter or early spring. Again, sulfur came back low on a lot of samples, and it's something to be determined still, kind of if we would benefit from some low-level sulfur applications. Overall, our zinc applications were coming back within range on average, but we did have a few growers who were below and do need to increase their foliar or soil-applied zinc applications. And then boron is something that we might need to watch. Did come back just slightly high. There was some questions on some of those samples if it was possibly related to people's irrigation water. So if this is something that you're interested in pursuing this year, we do have a blog post up that shows all of the pictures and the step-by-step guide for how to pull these samples, and it also links to the form that you need. And I will put this link here in the chat before we leave. And then Eric Staffney at Mississippi State has a nice blog post about how to take those results and interpret them, if this is something you're interested in learning more about. But as I said, I'm always happy to help look over the samples with you and make some recommendations. And that is all I have to talk about today, but I would recommend for anybody here in Arkansas, especially county agents, and I know Jan and Keith, I think you guys have done plant tissue nutrient sampling before with your demonstration locations, but now is the time, and we encourage growers to go out and pull some of these samples just to kind of get a better idea of how we're doing and if we can help improve fertility management for these guys. So with that, if there's any questions, I'm happy to take those.